Okay, so once again, welcome everyone to our first official feedback session with the Nature Record. For those of you that attended our past overview sessions, this is part of SCBNA's public engagement series with the Nature Records assessment. And we are very excited to kick off the feedback portion of that collaboration. So welcome everyone to our first session. I always like to start with a brief introduction of SVNA for those of you that are not familiar with our organization. The Society for Conservation Biology North America is a professional society dedicated to advancing the science and practice of conserving Earth's biological diversity. In a nutshell, we support everyone and anyone engaged in conservation, and we do that through a variety of different ways. We offer professional development opportunities. We host a number of research journal and publications that our members have access to. And we also offer opportunities for networking, primarily through our biannual conference, the next iteration of which is going to take place this summer. And some members of the Nature Record are going to be present. So we encourage everyone to attend. One of the big projects that we have going on this year is our collaboration with the Nature Record. And SCBNA's role in that collaboration is really to help promote the assessment, help promote the work of the authors that have engaged in that assessment, and also provide an opportunity for feedback and engagement with authors in the assessment. So this is really an opportunity for SCBNA members and non-members to engage with authors, to provide feedback, to ask questions, and to really get a sense of what the assessment is for. And as I mentioned before, this is the first feedback session that we have as a part of that collaboration, and we have 4 more that'll take place every 2 weeks from now on. Okay, so before I open the floor to a brief overview of the Nature Record, I just wanted to go through a quick set of guidelines for today's session. So essentially a couple of housekeeping rules. First of that is live transcripts. So we will be recording and uploading a transcript for this session, and in addition to a recording of the overall session after it's over. But we do encourage folks, if you want closed captions as a part of the presentation, to click on it on your screen. Closed captions, unfortunately, are not easily captured through recording, so this just makes it easier if you're looking for that as part of today's presentation. In addition to that, we just want to remind everyone that the chat will be active. This will primarily be used during our Q&A, but if you have any questions, comments, feedback throughout the rest of the session, please feel free to use the Q&A for that. And likewise, if you want to share a reaction as the presentation is going on, please feel free to do so. We encourage that, especially thumbs up if you see anything that resonates with you. Okay, and that is it for me. Otherwise, if there are any questions, please do use the Q&A, and I will pass it on to Phil for a quick overview.
Okay. Continue to share. All right. Does this look right? Okay. Because Tessa is probably in her mind making fun of me right now. Thank you, Bernie, and thank you so much for your partnership and the partnership of SCB North America. We really appreciate it. And thank you all for being here to the first of these feedback sessions where we're focusing on the first theme, how to assess nature. My name is Phil Levin. I am the director of the Nature Record. And today, the plan is for me to give you a lightning talk in case you haven't seen some of our earlier presentations, just to give you an overview of what this thing is. And then we'll have what amounts to an author panel, except we only have one author here because we're just covering one chapter today, and that's Dr. Katie Arkema. And then we'll have time for open discussion and feedback, and then closing remarks. So that's the plan. Before I go any further, I want to acknowledge I'm the director, but we have a number of our other staff here. And this is all of us. So Tessa Francis is here. She's a deputy director of the Nature Record. Leslie Wynn, Courtney Deloach Hill, and Athena Bartolino are here, and special thanks to Athena for helping really organize all these sessions that are coming up. So I want to just start, just like to acknowledge that those of us here maybe study nature or work in nature or spend time in nature, and we pay a lot of attention to patterns in nature and what's happening with nature. And we see lately a lot of these patterns are shifting. Maybe you see flowers blooming earlier than they once did, or pollinators that used to be abundant are harder to find, or species are appearing in places they never used to be, or wetlands are disappearing, or forest change, coastlines are reshaping. We see lots of different changes. These changes aren't abstract. They're happening in the places that we study and that we care about and where we live. And we know something fundamental, that nature isn't just scenery. It supports our health, our food, our economies, our cultures. In very real ways, nature shapes us. Um, but despite decades of research and monitoring, we still lack a clear shared picture of how nature is changing across the United States and what those changes mean for people. And that's really the purpose of the nature record, to bring together what we know about our lands, waters, and wildlife, and how they're changing and what those changes mean for the choices ahead. Because ultimately, if nature shapes us, then the decisions we make today will shape what comes next. And so the nature record is really composed of two parts. And the part we're really going to focus on in this series of webinars is the knowledge assessment. So our task here is to assess the status, trends, and future options for U.S. lands, waters, wildlife ecosystems, and the benefits they provide to economy, health, well-being, to climate, to culture, to environmental justice, and even national security. But there's another side of the project as well, which is to generate diverse products to expand the relevance and enable use of the assessment itself. So we'd like to, highlight that there's really two things going on. One is doing the assessment, and second, developing products to help make that assessment even more usable. We started in 2022 as a federal effort. Over the next couple of years, 2023 to 2024, we really began scoping the effort and initially drafting the early phases of the assessment. And then in 2025, we became an independent effort called the Nature Record. And now we're in this period where we're looking for public comment on the assessment itself, and the assessment is undergoing peer review by the national academies. We plan to release this online in the fall of 26, and then eventually this will be a book published by MIT Press that will be available for free as an ebook, and you can buy the paperback if you want in 2027. Everything we did is built on a lot of scoping and early development. When we were back in the government, we had a Federal Register request for information that yielded 3,000 comments. We had sectoral listening sessions where we heard from farmers and ranchers and fishermen and coastal zone users and outdoor recreationists, conservation biologists, and so forth. We did a number of consultations with tribes and Alaska Natives, and had Native Hawaiian engagement sessions and lots of general listening sessions. Overall, we've done about 75 different events, reaching representatives from 230 at least different organizations and thousands of people from 50 states. And from all this work that we did, scoping and really fleshing out what would be most useful to folks, we landed on three guiding questions. The first is what's happening in nature. So what are the status and trends, future projections of marine terrestrial and freshwater ecosystems, drivers of change for those systems, and human connections to nature. Secondly, why does any of this matter? Why do the changes in nature matter? Why does it matter to climate mitigation, adaptation, cultural heritage, the economy, health and human well-being, risk resilience, and national security? Third, what can we do about it? So how can we learn from success stories and bright spots? Are there opportunities for new or improved policies and practices? And all this is framed in the context of the best practices and frameworks and scientific assessments, which is what we're going to talk about today, and climate change and equity and environmental justice. This is an overview of the table of contents. You'll see again, one chapter today that we're focusing on is the frameworks and approaches chapter, and it fits in the context of the rest where we have sets up a bright spots chapter. So these are the success stories, our connections to nature, status and trends and future projections of the different ecosystems and the drivers of change, and then the impacts of those change. And we wind up with opportunities for nature. The audience for the assessment is really lots of folks, mostly not scientists. So our real target audience are policymakers, federal, tribal, state, local levels, practitioners and land water managers, NGOs and advocates, business leaders, philanthropies, educators and students, journalists, and the general public. So it's a broad audience we're trying to reach. And we feel like this is the right audience for this product. It's very similar to the audience of the National Climate Assessment that we're modeled after. So I think I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to turn it over to Katie Arkema. Katie is the chapter lead for the Frameworks and Approaches chapters. She's at the University of Washington School of Marine and Environmental Affairs, I think. And so, Katie, it's off to you.
Thank you, Phil, and thank you everyone for both inviting me to share our work on the Frameworks and Approaches chapter today, and also to be a part of this amazing effort and to get to lead one of the chapters. It's really been, I learned a lot, and it's been a really fruitful opportunity. I'm also looking forward to hearing everybody's feedback today on what we have so far. So I'm going to share my screen here. And I will say, please do put your questions or comments in the chat. I'm terrible about multitasking, so I will answer them at the end during our discussion time. But if anybody on the staff sees a comment that I should address in the meantime, please do let me know. Can you see my screen, Phil? Okay. Actually, let me just. Right, I'm just no.
We're seeing the author slide now, Katie.
I'm trying to, for some reason it is not showing me the screen. Showing me you, Phil. Let me see. Let me try resharing. I mean, I do. I clearly clicked a button that I shouldn't have clicked. Okay, sorry. All right. So as Phil said, I'm Katie Arkema. I'm the lead author for the Frameworks and Approaches for Assessing Nature chapter in the Nature Record Assessment. And before I begin, I wanted to just acknowledge all of my co-authors and Courtney again for all of the support and contributions to this chapter. This is really a fantastic group of people with a wide variety of expertise in a number of the disciplines that this assessment encompasses, from natural resource economics to social science to all of the different ecosystems, marine, inland, terrestrial that Phil mentioned, to climate, and a number of different factors that show up throughout the assessment. So it's been really helpful to have that breadth of expertise as we are laying out the frameworks and approaches for assessing nature. So the overarching question that we ask in our chapter is how and why do we assess nature in the US? And we specifically take a lens on this that consists of three different parts. How have we done this historically? How are we doing this now in the nature record assessment? And how might we build on what we've done in this assessment in future US nature assessments? So as a point of sort of departure, I wanted to share a few background bits of information that provide some context to this work. The first is that nature assessments have taken many forms and approaches and span geographies, many geographies and taxonomic scales. And so we explored a variety of different assessments of nature at these different geographies and economic scales as we were putting together the frameworks and approaches chapter. And this assessment in particular takes stock of US lands, waters, biodiversity, and wildlife and the benefits they provide for the country's economy, health, culture, security, and climate. Second, conceptualizations of nature have changed over time and are shaped by science and society. And this evolution in how we understand and relate to nature in turn influences the definition that the assessment has adopted for nature. We define nature as the complex web of all forms of life, plants, animals, fungi, protists, and prokaryotes, together with the abiotic or non-living components and processes that sustain life. Nature includes humans and is dynamic, encompassing ecological, evolutionary, physical, behavioral, social, economic, and cultural interactions at multiple scales. And third, nature assessments serve a range of purposes. So baseline and trend data for decision-making come from nature assessments. Assessments provide a foundation for scientific understanding, guiding prioritization, research needs and investments, and increasing public awareness. And one of the things that we do in this chapter is we lay out some example applications for nature assessment that you see here on the bottom right, from species conservation assessments to site level for specific geographies, assessments of biodiversity and habitat, organizational level assessments of nature to inform business planning, city development, assessments of interventions and management actions like restoration, conservation, development projects, national or regional ecosystem assessments, and global assessments. Okay, so our chapter is a little bit different than some of the other chapters, I think maybe all of the other chapters in the assessment that Phil listed in his overview. We have key themes in our chapters rather than key messages because we aren't going through the same sort of kind of evidence-based consensus approaches that are being taken in the other chapters. We're really laying out those concepts and approaches that we see historically in nature assessments and that we think will be useful in the nature record and going forward. And so our key themes are multiple dimensions of equity and justice in nature assessments, historical and current practices of assessing nature, frameworks and approaches for the nature record national assessment, and building on the nature record national assessment in future assessments. So those are those three elements below there. What have we done? What are we doing here? Where might we go from here in the future? Okay, so this first one on multiple dimensions of equity and justice in nature assessment. The first thing that we looked at for our chapter was better understanding how considering multiple dimensions of equity and justice can allow us to better understand four dimensions that are a key part of our national assessment. And those dimensions are distributional, recognitional, procedural, and restorative. Distributional equity answers questions around access to nature and nature's benefits. Who gets what and how much? And specifically what we sought to do in this section of the chapter and in this figure is think in very practical terms for the assessment and for outcomes of the assessment. So specifically here, for example, if assessments analyze the systematic exclusion of certain individuals and communities from nature, then we think decision makers can create policies to improve access to nature and nature's benefits. So if we can explicitly consider who is getting access to what, then we can be and make more informed policies and decisions around interventions to change that. Second, for recognitional, these questions around recognitional ask what matters and why, whose perspectives on nature, whose values, what are they and why do they matter? And then we take that same sort of if-then approach to apply this dimension in a very practical way in our chapter. Third, procedural equity asks questions around who decides in a process and how. How inclusive is a process? Who has power in a process? Who makes those decisions? And here we lay out an example of if participation in nature assessment is tailored for overburdened and marginalized communities, then those communities can more meaningfully participate in environmental governance. And lastly, we do the same for restorative. And restorative asks, how is harm addressed and repaired? And you can see the links between some of these dimensions like restorative and chapters in this assessment, in the bright spots chapter, in the opportunities for nature chapter. Okay, so the second theme is historical and current practices of assessing nature. This assessment is informed by and builds on previous nature assessments conducted in the US and around the world, as I mentioned earlier. And one of the things that we found in our review of historical and current nature assessments is that the goals, scale, scope, process, and types of assessments vary widely. So some assessments collect their own data and have very specific purposes, like fisheries stock assessments, for example, while others collect novel data sets or compile existing data to analyze the state of a particular taxa, the biodiversity of a region, or status and trends in ecosystem services. The nature record is the type of assessment that brings together expert authors to provide an authoritative synthesis of the current state of knowledge in a field or topic through consensus evaluation of the scientific evidence. And that leads to the key messages that I mentioned earlier that each of the chapters lay out. And these types of assessments are considered influential and authoritative, allowing for integration of knowledge from disparate disciplines and levels of organization. One of the things that we do in our chapter, and that I think is like particularly interesting and helps to put this assessment in the context of past assessments, is that we explore the arc of nature assessment in the US from pre-colonial to the present, and the role of indigenous knowledge systems in our understanding and assessment of nature, to what we call the Bennett area that focuses on some of the major events happening in the environment related to the Dust Bowl and soil conservation, to the Carson era inspired by some of Rachel Carson's work and how that helps to lay a foundation for modern nature assessments, to the institutionalization of nature assessments in the 1970s and 80s, to what we call the era of linking ecosystem services to human well-being in the late 90s and early 2000s, and most recently to the era of equity, resilience, natural capital, and technological integration. And you can see that our understanding of nature assessments has evolved when you read the chapter quite a bit over time, and also how we continue to reach in and can use different themes and approaches and concepts throughout this history. So it's not that this last era of the 2010s and 2020s gets it all right. It's more that we're building a knowledge base that we can draw on as we're conducting the nature record assessment and future assessments for nature in the US. So as we were reviewing a number of these different reports and peer review literature and nature assessments, we found it helpful to develop a typology for nature assessments. And that's what you see at the top of this tree depicted on the right. We can organize the sort of examples of nature assessment as nature inclusive. So things like the IPCC report, where nature is a key part of us understanding our global climate, in contrast with maybe more nature-focused assessments that are specific around particular taxa, biodiversity. This nature assessment, the IPBES, Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, sort of assessments that are specifically focused on the nature piece. And we can learn from the tools and approaches both from these nature inclusive and nature focused assessments, as well as targeted versus more comprehensive or holistic assessments. And that's what you're seeing down below in the roots. These approaches and tools in the boxes are key elements in effective nature assessment, like engagement and communication, analysis, uncertainty, and different types of framing and frameworks that we can use to understand status and trends of nature. In addition, we found that recruiting authors with diverse perspectives in different career stages and working with Indigenous and local knowledge holders is important for holistic place-based understanding of nature. Comprehensive author training and multidisciplinary teaming helps to reduce tunnel vision. And of course, fair data practices are an important part of making sure the information we're collecting is findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. Okay, so the third theme, which is frameworks and approaches for this nature record national assessment. And there's two components in the slides that I want to share. The first is laying the groundwork and the kind of context for conceptualizing human-nature relationships in the nature record assessment. And the second is to share with you a bit more about some of the nuts and bolts that are kind of core to the organization of the different chapters. Okay, I apologize for the density in this slide, but bear with me here. So I think it's really important, and one of the things that we talked a lot about as we're developing this chapter is that different conceptualizations of the human-nature relationship have emerged and become more or less dominant over time, as have the worldviews and scientific underpinning that shape how different researchers, communities, cultures, and regions define, assess, and value nature. This assessment really draws on these various conceptualizations and on the scientific underpinnings and metrics that sort of help to support them. And so here on the right-hand side is a draft version of this figure, and we are still working on it because we had to develop this chapter really as everyone else was also developing their chapters. And so one of the things that we are doing over the next few months in this chapter is looking back at some of the detailed changes that have happened in the other chapters over the last 6 months or so, and making sure that we are contributing or that we are reflecting those accurately in this draft figure 3 here on the right. And so this figure 3 on the right shows some of these different conceptions of the human-nature relationship. For example, I'll share that a nature for people perspective recognizes the value of ecosystem services by drawing on the integration of ecology and economics to quantify nature's contributions to human well-being. A people with nature perspective emphasizes environmental justice and coevolution with transdisciplinary and pluralistic scholarship that recognizes contributions of Western and Indigenous worldviews. And I do want to note here that, yes, much of this assessment relies on Western science concepts, metrics, and methods, and that there's additional accompanying products that are going to come alongside this assessment that sort of lean more into some of the Indigenous knowledge perspectives on assessing nature. I also want to recognize that this figure here on the right is really adapted from some core papers looking at nature-people relationships, including Georgina Mesa's 2014 paper and the Rayers and Bennett paper in 2025. And I want to harken back to something that I said earlier, which is that it's not so much that one of these versions of the people-nature relationship is more or less right than another, but it's what we want to communicate here is that each of the chapters in this assessment are drawing on different worldviews and scientific underpinnings that cross these different conceptualizations of how people as a part of nature relate. Okay, I wanted to document all this here, and this is in the chapter, so I'm not going to go over it in detail. What I just want to say is that each, from a more nuts and bolts standpoint, there are these 4 core components, some of which show up in multiple chapters, and some of which are sort of a specific focus of particular chapters. In general, for the whole nature assessment, the geographic scope and ecosystems include nature within all 50 states and cross a whole variety of ecosystems in marine, inland, and terrestrial systems. Drivers of nature are something that are considered not only particularly in the drivers chapter, but really show up in all of the chapters of the assessment. And the drivers that we consider vary widely. So yes, they include biophysical drivers that folks that are more, say, involved in the conservation side of things may think about when they're thinking about change in nature, like climate change, invasive species, air and water pollution, and land use. Drivers also include a number of the social, economic, and cultural factors that can influence inequality, discrimination, and disparities in access to nature. We also can consider some drivers and interventions that could really lead to benefits over time for nature and for humans within natural systems. A number of the chapters look at benefits, as Phil mentioned, specifically related to how healthy ecosystems support physical, mental, and community health, how nature reduces risks and fosters resilience, how nature underpins the economy, and the cultural, spiritual, and social benefits of nature. And each of these chapters uses various disciplines and metrics and approaches that are really like fundamental to these topics. So for example, the economy chapter uses market and non-market valuation methods, whereas the cultural chapter draws more on qualitative and interpretive approaches about relational and non-material values. Oops. Okay, I'm now to my last theme, and that's that we can think about as we're sort of envisioning what the nature record is, opportunities for building on this assessment in future assessments. And so what has been accomplished so far and where we are headed with the nature record is very exciting because we faced a lot of dynamics and challenges over the last couple of years and didn't have a whole lot of resources to start with. And so the fact that we are going to be able to produce this first nationwide assessment of nature, it really is exciting. And this assessment draws on literature review, existing information, and expert consensus. Going forward, what we see in our review of current and past nature assessments is there are opportunities for additional data collection and management, analysis of established scenarios, expanded application of diverse ways of knowing, and other engagement approaches that could help to strengthen what we're doing in terms of our national assessment of the status and trends of nature. And I know I'm kind of getting up to my time limit here. I want to give everybody an opportunity for questions. So I'll just mention a couple things here. And that's that we already have in place a lot of amazing long-term monitoring programs in the US to look at biodiversity and ecosystem status. And we see an opportunity to expand these and address data that are more on the management, land use, and other human drivers side of things that are currently fragmented. We also see an opportunity for stronger future assessments to to incorporate more ecosystem services information and coordinated federated networks to fill critical gaps. On the baseline and scenario side, with sufficient resources, we could develop agreed upon baselines, but we'll need to have some flexibility in the type of information we're bringing in because historical data are often limited and it can be difficult to develop these baselines. But if we can develop those baselines and think about potential scenarios, we have an opportunity to couch our US nature assessment within some broader climate and environment assessments and use shared scenarios and integrated models to assess policy interventions. Phil talked a bit about this, so I think I can mostly skip over this slide, but just acknowledging that there is an extensive amount of engagement and communication that was done to inform this effort. And as we move forward, we can think about different opportunities to even expand that engagement further. And a number of us in our chapter really found this paper kind of put forward by Pew Charitable Trusts, Karak Incorporation, and Inuit Circumpolar Council in Alaska interesting, and included this graphic in the chapter around how we can learn from multiple knowledge systems through iterative processes that involve particular actions and tools that help to build equity through co-production. And co-production of knowledge is, I think, often thought of as a traditionally Western term, but the underlying actions and processes of reciprocity, relationships, communication, and other elements of co-production really align with Indigenous knowledge and practices. And so we can learn a lot from our Indigenous colleagues who are working in this space in future assessments. And there's an opportunity to really weave diverse ways of knowing in nature assessments. Opportunities, or one of the really important things in terms of weaving diverse ways of knowing is avoiding integration or assimilation and treating different knowledge systems as equals without reducing one to the term standards or categories of the other. Many of you might be familiar with two-eyed seeing, which is an approach to fostering equitable dual knowledges as reciprocal, coexisting, and complementary. And there is a lot of work out there we can draw upon for respecting tribal sovereignty and community protocols, and recognizing that some knowledge is not necessarily meant for public dissemination or extraction, but can still inform future nature assessments. And so one of the things that we did in our chapter is that we invited a young artist and knowledge holder, Lucia Taroli, to develop a graphic that we felt might do a better job of explaining the holistic nature of both nature and the nature assessment than really we could put into words. And so her beautiful graphic is here on the right. And she shared with me that the title of this graphic is woven around the basket weaving interconnections. And the illustration's overall shape is inspired by the Lakota star quilt, which represents circle of life, and various topics. And there's a lot more in there than I have time to describe or share. And really, Lucy is the best one to do this. But I do want to just highlight that each of the different symbols in this represents different chapters in the nature assessment. So for example, the bright spots chapter is at the top there, and the climate change chapter is at the bottom with the mountain there. And various symbols are depicted as illustrations within these blue and green lines to demonstrate that while the assessment is divided into independent chapters, the topics are part of an interdependent whole. And I invite you to review the chapter and look at the more extensive description that Lucy helped put together about her artwork. So finally, I'll end by sharing a few emerging issues that we explored in our chapter. One is that technological advancements are accelerating and expanding data collection is happening that we envision sort of being able to leverage even more going forward. Um, and future national scale efforts could develop principles for ethical and responsible AI applications in nature assessment, as well as the impacts of AI on nature via energy, land, and water use. And one of the things that we see in the literature and have experienced ourselves is that complex environmental and societal challenges that we lay out in this assessment require a broad range of public and private actors, and that future nature assessments could consider polycentric governance and co-management among diverse actors to distribute rights and responsibilities, encourage learning and experimentation in nature assessment. And finally, I'll conclude with approaches to nature assessments that are in themselves resilient to societal change, may be better equipped to inform long-term management of complex social ecological systems to realize nature's benefits at multiple scales. I'll stop there and invite questions.
Thank you, Katie. And I'll just pop in here to introduce myself. Say I'm Tessa Francis. I'm the Deputy Director of the Nature Record, and so I'm going to be facilitating this Q&A session. And in addition to these questions from Katie, I dropped them and some others into the chat to prompt your thinking. And Katie, I might kick us off with a couple of comments that came in while you were presenting, and in fact, like directly related to your prompts, a couple of comments and questions on your figures. So I'll start with one, which was about the tree figure. So you could even bring it back up if you wanted. The comment is that it's interesting that in the tree figure, expert consensus is embedded within uncertainty. But in describing the nature record, you indicated that this will be an authoritative synthesis based on expert consensus. So can you clarify this sort of consensus-based evaluation and uncertainty and authoritative relationship in the way you're framing the chapter?
Yes, and I might also enlist you and Phil in helping me with this since we were did not develop since developing key messages was not part of our chapter. But I think one of the things that we see in our review of the assessments that we looked at is the importance of considering uncertainty and being using different tools and approaches like baseline, like scenarios, like different parameter distributions like expert consensus to be able to reflect which aspects of nature assessment we have more or less certainty or confidence in. And so that's why it's bucketed under that uncertainty category here of approaches, because it's a way of getting at where authors feel like there is more scientific evidence to support certain claims than they're making than other areas. So maybe I'll invite you both to add more about the consensus part of this if you'd like.
I will admit I was responding to something in the chat, and so I missed the start of the question. So,
I guess
you want
well,
to
I
jump in,
can jump
Tessa?
in and yeah, I can jump in and say that so a key feature under this uncertainty is this calibrated language, which is just a way of saying that we are really clear in our chapters about our levels of confidence in the information that we are sharing and in our key messages. So I guess I would say that authoritative doesn't mean everything is known. Like authoritative means that it's an acknowledgement. Importantly, it's an acknowledgement of the uncertainty, but it's meant to be a consensus-based view of the state of the knowledge around the different topics, while incorporating very methodical evaluations of confidence and likelihood around what is known in a consensus setting.
And I'll just add, we're in a minute we're going to share a link to our website where the draft all the chapters drafts are there. And I think that's one of the key aspects of feedback that's really important to us is to look at the assessment of uncertainty and do you see that the evidence provided supports that level of certainty? Or do you have additional evidence that you could add to that assessment of uncertainty? So I think your participation is really important and part of the picture.
Yeah, perfect. So please continue to drop your questions in the chat, and I will go on to another comment, Katie, about the people-nature relationship figure. It's a comment really saying that the figure is really helpful. And the suggestion is that the fields themselves, so maybe it would be helpful to look at them, the fields themselves change in their conceptualizations. And so placing them in one place may not work well, and subfields are decidedly in different places. So I think it's just a comment about the sort of categorization. I don't know if you have thoughts on how you all developed this or how this, I know this isn't your figure, but thoughts about that.
Yes, I think that is such a great point and something that we have really been challenged with as we're trying to envision what would be most helpful to put in this figure. It's so true. For a while, we tried to put the different chapters in the figure, but each chapter tends to draw on multiple different conceptualizations. So we're really trying to find the right or the most helpful balance between generalizing and categorizing to help people understand sort of these key concepts and the lens through which the nature record assessment is approaching nature assessment, while not getting trapped in exactly what the commenter is saying, which is sort of mistakenly bucketing things in places when they actually cross multiple columns. And so that's part of why this is really in draft still, is that we are still working on what would be the most useful types of information to include.
Yeah, great. This is really useful feedback, you guys. Thank you. Keep it coming. Let's see. So while people are writing in the chat, there's been a couple of questions that I can address that are sort of logistics. So there was a question about whether all the citations that Katie's been presenting would be available. And so this is my opportunity to say that the full chapter, of course, you're getting just a taste of it today from Katie, but the full chapter can be read in detail on our website, and you can provide written comments on the chapter through the website. And you'll see in the chapter that the full bibliography is provided there as well. So you can really get under the hood there. So let's see. Yeah, so just more on this figure that another comment, just what you were saying, Katie, a suggestion to abandon sort of a static version of this for the in adapting this figure as you move forward. And thanks, Phil, for dropping the website. Okay, here is a comment that I'll read. Nature is the mutable cloud of Emerson, always and never the same. We do not shape nature according to any plan, while nature shapes herself according to her own plan. That's a reference to this figure still. So as May superbly described, we need to evolve our social ecological system in balance to achieve people and nature state. However, as a manager, we're locked by rule and regulation in nature, despite people mode, and do not readily share operating space. I'm not sure we can overcome ourselves. And after 45 years of environmental management, I don't see restoration having much potential. Thank you, Paul. I should say Paul has been, I think, at every single one of our webinars since the very beginning. So it's great to have you here, Paul, reflecting your perspectives. as always. Any other questions, or if anybody else on staff is seeing other questions that I'm missing or comments?
I think I addressed this in the chat, but Katie, I wonder if you want the opportunity to reflect upon more than you have already, like specifically how relationality shows up across the assessment from your perspective, versus a more transactional or instrumental philosophy, for people who are interested in the relationality view and perspective. Do you have any suggestions of areas where they might look from your, I mean, I know that your perspective is different than ours, and I'm happy to provide some comments, but I think you're uniquely poised if maybe.
I hope I'm not repeating what you already said, Phil. But I do think there are a lot of areas where relationality comes in. Yes, there are several chapters that take more of an instrumental lens. But specifically the cultural heritage chapter, I think I saw Howie was on, but I admittedly have not read Howie's chapter for several months. But my suspicion is that the health and well-being chapter encompasses elements of relationality. Our chapter does have a much longer section on the importance of considering multiple dimensions of equity and environmental justice in order to make our nature assessments more effective and implementable and to achieve the outcomes we want to achieve. And so that's another area that I think the person could look for more information that's more on the relationality part. And I'm guessing also in the connections of nature chapter as well. And the connections with nature really highlight opportunities for further data collection that I think could help us get some of the relationality components in a maybe deeper way than have traditionally been tracked over time. So those are some things that come to mind.
We're running short on time, so I think we have time for just one more quick question before we wrap up. We won't have gotten to all the questions or comments, but Katie, could you share how or whether your chapter acknowledges the risk of commodification in the process of nature assessment?
Well, I'm curious if they're thinking commodification of the assessment itself or of nature.
Oh, I'm guessing nature. I'm gonna guess, let them do.
We don't, I would say we don't take a kind of a position on the value proposition of commodifying nature or not. We probably touch upon it the most in some of the description on the benefits chapters, where we mention and talk briefly about non-market valuation, and really point to the economy chapter. And then potentially, I guess, touch upon it briefly in this conceptualization of people-nature relationship section on worldviews. But we really take sort of a big tent approach that if we're going to assess all the different dimensions of nature and try to make this information useful for a wide variety of applications, that's going to take a variety of different approaches towards how we understand and how we track nature.
Great. Yeah, well, thanks. So Katie there in responding was mentioning other chapters where these questions and topics appear. And so this is my opportunity to ask you all, remind you all, tell you all that this chapter, Katie's chapter, the frameworks chapter, as well as all of our other chapters are available on our website for you to read in their complete form, and submit written comments. And just so you know, in the way that today's comments that you're sharing with your voices and your fingers typing to Katie are going directly to Katie, when you submit written comments on our website, those will also be given directly to Katie and to her author team to help shape her chapter and the rest of the assessment. So please do go to the website. Please continue to share your input. And thank you so much for being here today. And I will hand it back over to Bernie to wrap us up.
Perfect. I just wanted to thank everyone once again for attending today's session, and thank you, Katie, for your presentation and for answering questions. This is really just a brief reminder that we have 4 more feedback sessions coming up over the next few weeks. All of those are available for folks to register on our website, so please do so. We'll send reminders periodically about the sessions, usually about 72 hours in advance and also in the morning of. So you will always be updated in case there's a change in schedule or something else happens. But otherwise, thank you all for attending today's session, and be on the lookout for our recording, which will be uploaded to our website later today.
Thank you so much for all of your feedback and good questions.